Hey guys, Nomadic here. Just wanted to say thanks for tuning in. This has been my most heavily requested content by far, so here it is from my brain to yours. Enjoy. I wrote a little poem to get us started. It's called What Influences Aim? How the hand holds the mouse over the surface the sensor slides on. How the crosshair moves with the weapon model that guides. How the eye interprets and the mind responds. Now keep this poem in mind because we'll be coming back to it later on. For now, I want to introduce you to how I classify aiming in FPS. In my experience, aiming occurs in two ways: reactively and responsively. Reactive aiming happens when you see the opponent or when you react to something the opponent is actively doing on screen. It is singularly based in the visceral happenings of the moment. Responsive aiming happens when you don't see the opponent. It is based in how you respond to what is happening around you, i.e., your position in relation to where you believe the opponent to be, in relation to the next major item or your next objective, in relation to the sounds you hear around you, and so on. Reactive aiming demands only surface-level thinking due to its emphasis on a player's mechanics such as hand-eye coordination, in-game movement, muscle memory, etc. Responsive aiming challenges the player to consider everything that is going on around them. This allows a player to keep their crosshair at the ready, place a rocket, or pre-fire with the intention of dealing damage or fragging an opponent without ever seeing them. I've briefly mentioned weapon archetypes in the past, but didn't really go into detail, so let's do that now. The rocket launcher, railgun, and lightning gun make up the three distinct weapon archetypes that hold true for every FPS game. Those archetypes are prediction, precision, and tracking. In Quake, prediction encompasses the rocket launcher, nailgun, and tri-bolt. Precision, or hit scan, refers to the railgun and shotgun, and tracking for the lightning gun and machine gun. In this video, I'm going to focus on tracking because that's what people have requested and because obsessing over lightning gun accuracy is a pastime for all lovers of Quake. Back in the 120Hz CRT days, tweaking used to be about adjusting your config, i.e. your video settings, your button layout, sensitivity, FOV, and crosshair for each weapon, and on and on. Now it's about optimizing your OS and internet connection to achieve the best frame time consistency and completely eliminating input lag. I know it's not ideal, but tweaking your hardware and software to optimize performance and latency isn't something that should be dismissed. I don't care if you're running a brand new 12900K with a 3090 and 128 gigabits of 10,000 megahertz RAM. You're still going to have to take the time to tweak your OS, GPU, internet settings, and so on. So don't dismiss tweaking. Besides, knowing your system is running at its absolute peak is incredibly satisfying. And the best part is that most of the work has already been done for you. So be sure to check out the guides I've listed in the description below. Okay, enough about tweaking, now back to the theory. Remember our poem? If we break it into pieces, it falls into three parts. The first is physical, how the hand holds the mouse over the surface the sensor slides on. The second is in-game, how the crosshair moves with the weapon model that guides. The third is mental, how the eye interprets and the mind responds. With regards to the third or mental part of the poem, I already gave you my thoughts on this at the beginning of the video when I compared reactive versus responsive aiming. So let's focus on the other two, physical and in-game. There's been a lot of talk about weapon models and how they do matter, how they don't matter. Some people like them on the right, some in the center, and some wish you could just turn them off and run the game old school without any weapon model on screen. Some weapon models take up more space on the screen. Some have more frames in their firing and reloading animations. Some make more pleasant sounds with less distracting hums, and so on. So, here's my armchair psychosomatic theory on the matter. The brain uses the weapon model to connect the hand with the crosshair. Thus, at the end of the day, it's to each his own. For me, the weapon models that I use in relation to my crosshair, and its size and color, play a critical role not just in how I aim, but how I move, position myself for fights, react to the opponent, and so on. When using a tracking weapon, you are utilizing reactive aiming, i.e., an opponent is on your screen and you are actively tracking their movement with your crosshair using either the lightning gun or machine gun to deal damage. An exception would be something like Visor's piercing sight that allows you to track the opponent through physical barriers and line up shots with your crosshair. But for the other 99% of the time, you're going to be exchanging fire with an opponent on screen. Thus, your aim is in reaction to what the opponent is doing. What's critical to remember is that aiming and movement make up a symbiotic relationship when it comes to maxing out damage with a tracking weapon. Due to their knockback properties, the more initial damage you deal with a tracking weapon, the better your chances are to deal even more damage. This is because knockback makes movement predictable. And this works in the opposite. Knockback introduces unintended movement to the crosshair, i.e., receiving knockback disrupts aim. Therefore, if someone has you pinned with the lightning gun, it's going to be difficult to compensate for the knockback you are experiencing and accurately deal damage back to them. Thus, the goal is to establish a tracking lock as early as possible. Another point to consider is that once a tracking lock is established, it's very difficult to escape from. This is because the recipient of the tracking lock is under the sustained influence of knockback. Thus, any movements they make will still be in the direction the knockback is pushing them. And this introduces the importance of effective ADing in an LG fight. ADing refers to the default left and right strafe buttons A and D. By properly timing these left to right strafe movements, players can essentially avoid an LG lock by keeping their opponent's aim off balance. When two opponents square off with the LG, it's common to start the fight by ADing quickly. However, this usually won't help you avoid a lock for more than a couple seconds. The point of ADing quickly isn't just to avoid a lock, but to also train your opponent's aim. Doing this effectively requires practice because it isn't a decision you can make on the fly. Rather, it's a feeling that you pick up on once you realize your opponent is barely dealing any damage to you. When done successfully, your opponent won't be able to establish a tracking lock on you. But this won't last long because everyone adapts. Thus, the next step is to keep your opponent's aim off balance by transitioning to more spread out strafes. When done correctly, the opponent will deal minimal damage and never really achieve a true tracking lock. Now that we've gone over how to avoid a lock, let's think about how to establish a lock against an opponent that is ADing. As I said in the beginning, when an LG fight commences, it's normal for each player to start by ADing quickly. However, strafing in this way carries with it the consequence of affecting aim as it adds left and right movement to the crosshair. What you don't want to do is match your strafes with your opponent's left to right crosshair movement, because that will reward them with a tracking lock. Instead, you want to lengthen your strafes against the ADing opponent. Doing so will force them to compensate by slowing down their AD movements, and as a result, reward you with the opportunity to establish a tracking lock. Training your mouse hand to relax once you've established an LG lock is the only bit of real aiming advice I can give on the topic of tracking. I don't mean to say that you should relax your aim, as making corrections is still necessary. It's just that correcting aim isn't as necessary as it was before establishing a tracking lock. This is because any opponent that is the recipient of a tracking lock will be heavily influenced by knockback, and thus their movements will be more constricted to the space within the immediate vicinity of your crosshair. Well, that about wraps it up for me. I think we've hit the physical, in-game, and mental aspects of tracking and locking opponents pretty thoroughly. Hopefully you got some new insights to consider the next time you're zapping kids off the server. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to mention them down below as I read everything. Thanks for watching, lick that like button, smash subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.